Well, welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Well, we're going to be talking about projects again because it's been raining almost constantly for the last 2 weeks. We can't get out and do anything, and so anyway, we're at a stopping point on our ProMac 510. And parts haven't come in yet, and I just noticed that parts coming in anymore takes a lot longer than it used to, so I had to put this aside. And the same thing with our Super Pro 80. I haven't got the parts to fix it yet, so it's on hold. And over here we have our Brenner lawnmower. Unless there's something really wrong with the engine, which it doesn't have any indications of such, the only thing I got left to do on it is finish cleaning the fuel tank, and there's some rust in it that really, it's hard to get out. I've been using evapor rust on it, but it's not taking out the real heavy stuff, so I may have to use muriatic acid to do that again, which I don't like using. And then I ordered some gas tanks in it for it too, so. But since it's raining so much, and it's going to continue raining for a while, and the lawn's grown about 6 inches in the last 3 or 4 days, it doesn't look like I'll be doing any mowing anytime soon. So anyway, there again, we're going to be talking about projects. So I'm going to be working on stuff that we can work in the sheds here and get done. So first one is that you know, a lot of the hobbies that we have, you know, the family shares. So old engines, or you know, we all have old engines in our collections, outboard motors, and you know, vintage motorcycles and things like that. A lot of stuff we haven't really shown much in the videos, but anyway, since the weather's been so crappy, we're going to be working on a very interesting old engine. Okay, well, like I say, you know, the family shares a hobby, so this is my son's 1913 Waterloo Boy 1 3/4 horsepower hit and miss engine. This is what's called a contract engine. They would paint them a different color and put different decals on them so that different places could sell them, so that if you had a Waterloo dealer on this block and you had a Big Chief engine dealer on that block and then another brand over here, that was very common in the early years of the gas engine industry. So Waterloo engines were made, first ones in 1903, and they were one of the larger sellers and made really good high quality engines. And 1918 Deere and Company, which was John Deere, bought them out and stayed with the design until the early 20s, and then in 1923 John Deere engineered their own engine line, a lot more modern than this one. But anyway, we're just going to talk briefly about the features of this engine. So this item here is your ignition system. That's what's called an igniter. And so what you would have to this, you would have dry cell batteries hooked up to it, and then there was a coil, and it's what's called low tension coil. And the low tension means low voltage, and I'll be doing an upcoming video on them here in a while, but I talked about high tension magnetos and spark plugs recently. How the fuel air mixture gets fired off on these is inside of here there's a set of contact points, and normally they're open. And as this thing turns over, this little push rod right here, and there's a little lever underneath there, it trips it, and what that does, that flips the points open real wide, and they'll come down and close, and they'll bounce back open, and when they do that, that's when you get your ignition spark. Like I say, I'll demonstrate one in the future here. So anyway, we'll come over here and show some of the other features. Okay, well, if you don't know much about these old engines, there's two types. This is a hit and miss engine, and there's a throttle governor engine. But since we're going to be talking about hit and miss, what that means is it doesn't fire every 2 revolutions of the crank like a regular 4-cycle engine does. It will if it's under a load, but if it doesn't, it coasts. So how that works, right down here, you can see there's a lever here, and that's hooked to the governor. And so as the engine's running, If it starts to run too fast, the weights here on the governor will push that in like that, and then it'll hold the exhaust valve open till the engine coasts and slows down, and then when the flyweights move in again, it'll pop out, and then it'll draw in a fresh mixture of air and fuel, and then it goes up on the power strokes and fires again. So anyway, the governor, like I say, there's these weights right here. As they move in and out, they control the operation of this rod to catch the exhaust rod or not. This is your governor right here to control the speed. Put more pressure on this to hold it open, or less to go faster. These engines run about 500 RPM, between 350 and 500 normally. And you can see there's no crankcase on it. So on lubrication, there's several things. There's these grease cups here, and right here on the end of the connecting rod for the rod bearing. So you fill these with a special grease, and before you start the engine, you tighten these down so you see this grease squeeze out around the main surfaces here, side of the rod, and that lasts for quite a while. And then you've got a little roller right here, and the governor, and there's another roller right here. And what do you use on that? Oil can, a vintage one, of course. And like I say, when I talk about our hobbies, you can have one main hobby and there's other things that all go to it. So you got your engine, you have to have oil systems here again, and right behind here, which you can't see, but to lubricate the piston, there's a drip feed oiler. It's a little brass piece that has a adjustable tip on it that lets oil drip down on top of the piston. And so anyway, there you go, a true hit and miss, a real gem from the ancient part of history. And the other thing about these is, you know, the history on them and stuff is really fascinating. So what I'm going to do as we start doing the different repairs on it, I'll put together a video and whatnot. So we're going to pull the piston out, check the rings, replace them if needed. We've got to get the igniter working, and the valves are not seating real well, although they move nice and free. But what we're going to do is do a valve job using antique valve grinding equipment. We'll go step by step through that. So we'll be back with our next project. Well, for our next project here, we have a little engine here. It's made by International Harvester Company. This is what's called a Model LA. They're rated from 1.5 horsepower to 3 horsepower. And you can see that the crankcase is all enclosed. It's an overhead valve engine with a cover over it. And you have two different pulleys here. You have the main flywheel, and you have another one here, just a pulley. And that, you can run a belt off this if you want to run it at the high speed. The engines run at the low speed at 600 RPM, and high speed's 1000. So this runs off the camshaft, and of course that's half speed. And this is a homemade water hopper. You just pour water in here to cool them. The same thing on the Waterloo on the top. There's just an opening that you pour water in to cool it. But you know, this was a fairly modern engine, and they made these from 1934 until 1941. Sold lots of them. Really high quality little engine. But you know, I talk about how things are made, and you know how crappy a lot of stuff is today. Well, this thing, like I say, is really well made. Here's your little lever here to control your engine speed. So 1.5 to 3 horsepower. I wanted to show you some of the neat little features here. Okay, here you have your intake and exhaust valve. This is your exhaust side intake. And right here you can see there's a place to oil the rocker arms here. Now they made two versions of this engine. The bigger one's Model LB. It's rated at 3 to 5 horsepower. But the difference on this one, you have to lubricate this with an oil can. There again, collecting antique oil cans is a good hobby and useful. And the LB actually had a tray in here with a felt in it, and it actually oil from the crankcase come up through a tube and lubricate it. But you know, there again, I just want to briefly talk about a little rant about why stuff is so crummy today. So instead of having to take this cover off to lubricate the rockers, it's got a nice little cover you can slide back and forth. You just put your oil can in and squirt it. And I was talking recently about a Toro lawnmower I inherited from my dad. Absolute top of the line mulching mower, self-propelled, everything. It doesn't even have a drain plug for the oil on the engine. Now that is totally stupid. And on the new Briggs engines on lawnmowers, they say you don't have to change the oil, just keep adding it. Well, that guarantees you have to buy a new lawnmower every 3 years, because the problem is oil is just oil, but the thing that makes it great are all the additives, and the heat and stuff dissipates, and so you're running with really dirty, crummy oil that hardly lubricates, and you put in like a quarter of a quart and stuff. It's not going to lubricate, it's just going to blow up. So that's why we use Obsolete junk. It's the best. I'll come back with a little more BS for you. Well, I just wanted to briefly talk about our channel. You know, when we started it, it was more or less a joke. We were just having dinner one time, and you know, the boys and friends and stuff said, "Hey, you ought to start a YouTube channel since you know so much about old junk and collect it all." And I thought, well, that might be fun to do. But so we did, and it took off very slowly. And I thought for sure it was just going to collapse, but it kept growing just a little bit here and there. And over time, you know, there was more and more viewers and people starting to subscribe and leave messages for us and whatnot. So when I don't remember how long I was into doing it, but you know, our viewership was still pretty small. And there was another channel called the Iron Horse. He's a chainsaw guy, and he had a pretty good following and stuff, and so he put a shout out about us and stuff. That really improved our viewership and helped get us to get going. So I'm going to talk about several channels that I watch occasionally, and I would recommend that you watch them and give them a thumbs up and say, "Oh, Mr. Obsolete sent you," because they're mostly related to chainsaws and axes and vintage stuff like we do. And so the first one is JT Chainsaw Shop. He's a young guy, and he's just starting out. Does vintage chainsaws, and looks like he's got a couple old tractors. And so, you know, just kind of a similar theme that we have, but it'd be good to give him some views to help him expand his channel. Another one, you know, people occasionally say, "Oh, where do you get parts for your old saws and stuff?" Well, I don't have any one source for them because it's all dispersed for the antique and vintage saws. So how I do it is I get a book on them, whatever saw I'm working on, and then I will look and see what parts I need, get the part number, and I'll search by part number. A lot of times people buy an inventory or an old store or something, they have absolutely no idea what they have. So I'll just put the part number up, and then I look at it and snag it. So I'd recommend that others do the same thing. But recently I had a couple of people looking for some home light parts, and there's a guy in Oregon, Leon's Chainsaws Parts and Repair. So that's what he does. And so I sent them, hopefully you can get a coil for them, get those guys their old saws running again. So anyway, it's just nice to have a camaraderie behind, you know, this, and different people have different stuff to watch, and so it just makes it a lot more interesting. Another guy is over in Eastern Washington, Dan at Kane Custom Garage, and he does mostly chainsaws, but he's got hot rods and all kinds of other stuff. And real interesting cat, and he really works at it, his channel. I mean, a lot of people thought they'd get into this, make a lot of money. That was not ever on my agenda, because I didn't want it to be an all-consuming thing. And not having any time to do anything else. So that's why I keep it at such a low level and just do a occasional video once a week, which is plenty for us. So another one, we go back a long time, is Smitty's Chainsaws and Firewood channel. He started out as a home light collector, but he's branched out and he's got into hot rod and saws, and so he's doing all kinds of stills and huskies, and did a partner here recently and stuff. And so it was interesting to see how his channel grew and how it broadened his horizons and stuff. And it was a good thing for him. And another one, this guy does mostly modern saws, but his name is Richard Flagg, F-L-A-G-G. And like I say, he's works on mostly modern chainsaws, but he's just got a really down-to-earth way of looking at these, how he diagnoses them. And the other thing that I found pretty interesting was, people say, oh, I use this Super Trick oil at 100 to 1, and my saw runs great, for about 2 minutes. But he tested a lot of different oils, and it was interesting because most of the factory recommended oils fared very poorly on the teardowns, and looking at the wear and stuff on the inside. And I knew that same thing happened to me. I made the mistake of buying new stills and huskies years ago and ran them at 50 to 1. They all just wore out. So I had to go back and start using my McCullochs that got over 43 years on them still, using my favorite Bardell VBA. And so anyway, that's a good channel to watch too, because it's common sense, there's no BS. It just, this works, this doesn't, and here you can look at it, make your own decision. Another one, this will be the last one. This guy is in the Northwest, I believe. It's called 8 Wheels Rollin'. And he's been collecting vintage saws. And the last video he just did was, he was fixing his son's axe. He had hit something pretty hard and put a big divot in it. And so he shows how to sharpen it, and just there again, down to earth type stuff. He doesn't have any fancy jigs to hold the axe or anything like that. Just use what you have, just like we do. And did a really nice job and whatnot. So anyway, we'll be back to our projects when I finally get some parts. Well, I just wanted to talk briefly about 8 Wheels Rollin'. One thing he mentioned, and the same thing I do, is I don't over sharpen my axes. I can't cut the hair off my arm or leg or whatever with this. I could probably cut my leg off if I tried. But anyway, this is my dad's old saw, axe that I inherited. It had a really bad edge on it. It's weird. I don't know how long he had this thing, but he never asked me to sharpen it or anything. And it must have worked good for him because he kept using it for years. So anyway, the handle was completely dry and stuff. I just go back and watch a recent video on it. So far I've put 3 coats of linseed oil. It's still dry, so I got to put a whole bunch more on it. But then again, talking about the edge here, see, it had I think the average axe is about 21.5 degrees at an angle on the tip. Well, this one's like that. And I cut it back about 1/8 of an inch. It's got a reasonably sharp edge, not super sharp, but for splitting firewood, I find you don't need a super sharp one. And if you over sharpen it, it dulls quickly. So anyway, I'll go out and demonstrate it here as soon as it quits raining. Okay, well, I'm just going to show you, even with a blunt edge like this thing has, how easy it cuts through this stuff. You can see it's nice straight grain. It's been dry about 2 years, I think. But anyway, let's give it how easy that went through there. Didn't have to put hardly any energy into it at all. So anyway, vintage is best. Gotta run, it's raining.